Welcome to the No Switch Fitness podcast, where we aim to combine education and anecdotal experience that will allow you to take no off switch in the pursuit of results. Today, we are joined by your host, Luke Miller, and No Switch Fitness coach and educator, Jamie Granville. Let's hop into today's episode.
All right, guys, welcome back to the No Switch Fitness podcast. We're going to be doing a couple more of these live dynamics for YouTube. A little bit shorter episode series, not really on any specific topics, just more so sharing thoughts on different things that we've kind of been thinking about or talking about, just kind of in casual conversation. And as you guys know, we have Jamie here. Jamie's another coach with No Switch Fitness, an educator. Most of you guys know who she is at this point. So really fun topic today, something that you kind of brought up within conversation around just like how to handle yourself as a coach and making sure that we are handling ourselves in a way that is optimizing the results for our athletes, because we do have carryover into how that athlete performs and how that athlete executes. And the way that we carry ourselves is really important. So I think just the initial topic to kind of start to lay out is the emotional reactivity side, right? And we've talked about this ad nauseum before, but laying out the framework of why that happens and potentially what we can do to avoid it. And then we'll get into how that affects the athlete later, but just kind of starting, because you brought up a good point in conversation, where do coaches become emotionally reactive from?
Yeah. And it's the difference though between responding and reacting first. So
yeah,
I always want to be able to have enough information that I respond, as opposed to having to make reactive decisions. And I guess you could say it's subjective and objective.
Yep. And a lot of that comes from the data tracking, right?
Yes.
The systems that are in play that allow us to make objective decisions within the clients that we work with. And that data tracking system is not the only thing that's going to help with that, but I think that's where a lot of it starts, right? And I know I've had client situations where you get the initial email, either they're being emotional about something or they're suggesting a change that's coming from previous experience that's an emotional attachment to something. And you have to take a step back and walk them through the progress they've made over the last 4, 6, 8, 12 weeks in order to make your point. And if you don't have that data kind of logged, and it's not going to be a really great way to communicate that if you don't have that data there to show them, look, understand where you're coming from. Clients want to know that you're listening to them, but this is kind of why we're not doing it this way. And if you go back and you see the trend of progress over time, we're doing everything right and everything is moving in the direction that it needs to go. And it allows you to have that objective, logical explanation to why you're making this decision, rather than this emotional response that could offset the client and eventually lead to poor execution, right?
Yeah. And I think that it's also something that helps to educate our clients to allow them to be more objective, right? So if they see us operating that way and, taking a step back and let's actually see all of the things that are contributing to this possible change, or whether it's obviously probably negative, right? Mm-hmm. And let's take a step back. Let's look at how the trends have been. What's correlating with this, right? And I think that especially in a contest prep situation, you're already leaning more towards the emotional side, subjective side anyways, because it's very physical. And they tend to not see the big picture. It's tunnel vision. And so for us as coaches, I think that it's important for us to be able to talk to them about that, to say, no, let's look. Things have been like this, and these are the things that we've been seeing progress with. What has changed?
Right.
And if you're not collecting enough data, and I'm not saying data is the only,
it's not. We'll get into
just
some of
the
others.
important piece, but if you have been collecting data and you're seeing trends, and it's, this, let's just say the rate of weight loss has been dialed.
Yeah.
And all their variables, and they're executing. And then it's all of a sudden weight starts trending up for a few days.
Yeah.
So if you haven't been collecting any subjective feedback from them about like fatigue or exogenous stress that's been happening in their life, because that can often affect it. Or maybe it's just that one day they had eaten a little bit more fiber than they normally do, or water has been off, and it's tracking all of those things. So if something has been really consistent for a long time and then all of a sudden it's not, it can just be you making them aware of like, don't stress about it. It's probably these 3 things or this one thing.
Yeah. It can really pull a client off the edge too, right?
Yeah.
Because a lot of times they're like gunning to make a decision that's going to be a change. And I've even had clients a little bit more on the experience side where they just go ahead and do it. And they tell me afterwards, it's like, man, I wish you wouldn't have done that, because we have this trend that shows X, Y, Z. We should have taken step A, not step B, which you took, in order to keep this moving in the right direction. So I think a common one, just to kind of lay an example of this before we get into some of the other aspects, is in that prep situation with people who have stronger body parts. Typically, they're the ones that get in shape the fastest, right? Because there's more tissue there. They typically carry less body fat in that area. And so they get to a point in prep where they start to see that fade in order for the rest of the physique to start to come in. And they get really emotionally attached because that body part has always been their strong body part. But the visuals are telling you like, man, this is not looking the greatest. Maybe there's some inflammation there. It's just kind of maybe a little flat. But the reality of it is, in order to gain the benefit of rebounding off of a deload and dropping fatigue, you have to take it there where you can then rinse it off on the back end. And a lot of times that comes with your best body part looking a little bit worse, for your worst body parts to make it all the way in, and then dropping the fatigue to nail the look on stage, right? And so this is like a classic example 101 of where you see that emotional side of the client requires a lot of objectivity on our end to be able to explain that well to them.
Yeah, because I think that they just get so stuck in the future. It's just like, I can't look like this on stage. I can't, like, normally my legs don't look like this. And it's, it's bringing them back to the present and being like, no, we just need to be able to control today. And these are the steps that we're going to take now that might skew some things now, but it's a step that in part of the process in order to get that in the future.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah, and the way you respond to this is important, because you need to make sure that the client knows that you're listening to them and that you hear them, but then lay out logically why you think they may be wrong. Like, it's like a compliment sandwich, or if, like Mad said in the podcast with them from the UK, they call it a shit sandwich.
Yeah, it's the shit sandwich. Right? Yeah.
It's letting them know, hey, I'm here for you. I want what's best for you. This is kind of why I think you're wrong and why we need to go X, Y, Z direction. But look at the progress you've made throughout this entirety. Like, this is a great trend to be on for this prep. We just need to make some steps to keep you moving in the right direction, right? And so then they leave the conversation heard, and understanding why you're making that decision, right? Which is where a lot of people can kind of start to go wrong. Now, an interesting topic within this, like handling yourself as a coach objectively and emotional reactivity, which is something I want to hear you talk on, is you noted about potentially this being why we don't see as many female coaches coaching at a higher level, right? Is kind of that emotional reactivity management. And so I think it'd be a little bit more apt if you kind of started to open Pandora's box on that, and kind of dive into why we may see that, and how we can move female coaches forward and up the ranks of coaching.
Well, I mean, it's something that I've always wondered about, right? So before, and of course, when I was starting to get into coaching, and if you just look at the difference between male and female coaches, I think a lot of people can see that usually male coaches are far more objective. And whether that's like, you look at even just like the stereotype of, well, there are far more men that are engineers.
Yeah.
And that there are far more men that are interested in mathematics.
Yeah.
As opposed to females.
Which,
right?
if you look at teaching, there's a lot more females that are teachers than males.
Yeah. I think there are a lot of reasons why it happens. One of them, I think, is just I think there's a big barrier for females to get into higher level of coaching in the first place, just because it is very male dominated.
Yeah.
And that it can be very difficult, one, for us to gain credibility.
Okay.
And I think that it's like for men that you guys don't have to put yourself, or you don't put yourself out there necessarily physically
Okay.
with your body in order to try and gain traction or credibility or attention.
Attention more.
And so, whereas I see that's definitely more so
On the female side.
on the female side, is that, I mean, I even feel pressure to be posting more posts about my physique in order to get attention as a female, as opposed to if I'm just like putting out information and talking the same topics that you would talk about, it's not going to get as much traction as, say, you would.
Right. I think there's potentially an audience thing there too, right? Like when we see females who are intellectually a little bit more education based with their content and they start there, I think that audience is there for that content to do well. I think because the rise to the top is quicker with the physical appearance stuff, in that you don't have to have as much intellectual capacity in order to look good in a photo, relative to being able to express your thoughts and verbalize with logical reasoning and all this kind of stuff. That's where we see potentially that difference in the audience, right? Because there's certainly guys who use, like in men's physique, their physique in order to kind of help them rise to the top, right?
Yes.
But their audience, again, from an attention standpoint, is their physique. And so their pages represent that. I think what you're seeing is what you cited in the beginning, is that the interest in the why for males a lot of times is a lot higher than the interest in the females. Now, I have seen a shift in the industry. There's certainly a lot of good coaches out there who are females who are moving up with the quality of the client that they coach. And I think that that's a lot. I think that is going to continue to move in the direction that it's moving. I also think it's partially results-based in that you don't have as many females that have produced results at the highest level. Therefore, the audience and the respect as a coach is not there yet. Because like once you get someone who's winning, they're often respected as a coach in some capacity, right? And it's potentially just the opportunities that have been given to these people by creating a consumer ideology in a brand that proposes coaching as the forefront rather than proposing a physique or bikini pictures as the forefront, right? Like you go to most female pages, it's not pictures of all their clients.
No.
It's the 900 different photo shoots they did this year in whatever order they want to put it in, right?
I think that part of it too is just, it's also a patience thing.
Yeah.
So I think that because it is far more work for us in order to get to that level, to seek out the information, because I mean, even with dealing with enhanced athletes, it's far harder for females to, or like female enhanced athletes. It's far harder. It has been harder for us to find legitimate information
and education on it,
evidence based.
Yeah.
And I think that it's like having the patience to actually learn all of those things and seek it out. It has been a barrier as well, right? So that it's just like, well, you know, that obviously is so taboo and no one's talking about it anyways. I'm just going to, you know, use my TNA to build my platform. Yeah. Because people are going to be far more attracted to that than me talking about, you know, level or how you should start enhancement as a female.
Right. Yeah.
Like boring things like, what? I shouldn't start with, you know, Anavar or whatever, right? Like the norm.
Yeah.
So I think that it's like, I honestly do think that it's a patience thing.
Yeah, for sure.
And it's going for the, you know, the low hanging fruit.
Yeah. Kind of like I said earlier, it's easier to not have the intellectual capacity, but look good in front of a camera to take that rise to the top rather than the opposite way around. Right. Because we have like one example, Sybil, who used to coach Rolly Winkler. Like she was fairly well respected with the results that she got with Rolly. Who as an example that made it pretty high up the ranks, right? So I think it's potentially prioritizing that coaching in the forefront from a branding perspective, and then giving it the time by signing up for things like the female module.
Yeah, which is
to learn things.
Game changer.
Yeah, to learn how to coach females. And because as a female, your initial client base is going to be very female dominated, right? You just resonate with a female a lot quicker than you do with a male. And then as you build that client portfolio, then you'll be pretty well respected across either gender, right? I think for males, it's fairly similar, right? I think most females don't buy into a male coach unless they're coaching other females for the most part. So I do think that there is an aspect of how are they getting there that's playing to it. And then part of like the innate desire for learning that needs to be there. But I think it's definitely moving towards that, because we do have a lot of female coaches coming up that are doing great work, producing great content, putting winning athletes on stage. It's just a matter of time at this point.
I think that the other barrier too is just with like women or females, that if you have children, I think you have to look at that aspect too, because I think it's not that, I don't think that it holds people back necessarily, but I mean, I know you guys are just about to have a child. I have 2 kids that are like, grown and gone. So I've been through that. And I mean, part of the reason why I stepped back from competing for 10 years was because of my kids and because of how much work they are. And so I think that is a bit of a barrier for females, because it's like, for me, in order for me to do this and coach to the level that I want, it's like an all in thing. And there's a lot of time and effort spent on my part with education, like educating myself, and then putting the time in coaching people to gain experience in those situations as well. And I couldn't have done it with smaller children. And so, either it's, women that are possibly not going to have children, I think that would excel. Or for me, it's like now my career is picking up because it's after my children are gone.
Yeah.
And it's like I can focus on myself and my career now. So I think that needs to be taken into consideration as well.
Yeah, for
Whereas
sure.
as I'm not saying that guys are deadbeat dads by any means, but the roles are always going to be different, and men always do have more freedom.
I would
like
agree.
Fathers do.
Yeah, absolutely.
And you don't understand that until you have a child and you're a mom, because that kid is just for how many years they're just attached to you.
Yeah.
Like,
yeah. Literally.
And so it's always been that mom stays home basically and dad works, and lots of people might disagree with me, but that still is pretty much the norm in our world.
Yeah, you have a lot more career-based females, but a lot of them are still working from home, from their jobs, so that they can be. It's like Emily, like my wife is a pediatric nurse practitioner, and she is a smart fucking cookie. Like graduated from Vanderbilt, like intellectually just a whip, right?
Yes.
But she chooses to work part-time twice a week because she knew that the baby was coming and that's going to be there, and she wants to be home with the kid. Right? Like for her career, that's not the best decision if she wants to progress into specializing and then progress any further into like opening your own clinic or anything like that. But she is wanting to do that because that's going to be what's required in order to take care of the kid to the level that we want to, right?
Yeah.
And so I do think that role is still there and very present within, and it is probably in more traditional families, right? But kind of across the board for those. But I would agree with that.
I mean, it's shifted for sure, where there's definitely more, things are more even between,
Male,
female in relationships now, and with raising children. But it still is like, I still always think I always feel like it's the majority of the time it's the mom that has the more responsibilities. And I'm not saying it's because the father's doing that. It's just being a mom.
Yeah, it is.
So
I do think the last aspect of this is a maturity level. And I think that this comes I don't necessarily associate maturity with age. I associate it with how you handle yourself in certain situations. And I think that's cross both sexes, in that when you get something that catches you off guard, it's like, how do you respond or react to it? Do you read it, take a second to think about it, maybe come back to it at a later point where you can respond to it in a more objective manner? Or are you immediately firing back an email or firing back a loom that's like elevated in tone and is getting a point across rather aggressively that could potentially be a little standoffish to the client? Now, that doesn't mean if you have to have a hard conversation with your client, you don't have a hard conversation with your client. You guys know, and especially the clients that work with me, like, if it's there, I'm going to take it, right? If that's what is necessary to move you to a higher level as an athlete. But there's also a way of doing that when something happens that, could evoke a emotional response, right? And I think that maturity level within our industry is slow to develop because of the egos that are attached with coaching and the egos that are attached within the industry as they develop to like higher levels of exposure. There's a lot of ego attached to physique development, and it's a little bit more of a vain sport, which it's not completely vain, or there's a lot of people out there who just do it for the process, but there is large egos, and I think it limits the maturation process in people who want to coach at a high level and how to handle humans in that way.
Yeah, it's like, it's emotional maturity.
Yeah, absolutely.
Is what it is.
Yeah.
And I mean, just touching on the whole female thing too, I think part of the reason why we don't see more women excelling in high level coaching is because of, if you're trying to educate, that it can be very difficult because it's hard because of the responses that you get. Mm-hmm. And we had that discussion about, the way that, and it's like that, some of the comments that I've had just putting out some content on female enhancement, and women taking it as I was passing judgment and them missing the point of, and it's a lot of things that can be controversial or taboo. And I'm not talking about just enhancement. It can be anything where, it's been one way for a long time and that's all they've known and that's all they've learned and it's what they have done and it's been their process. And to hear someone else start talking about it, it would be received differently from you as opposed to another female talking about it.
Yep.
And if I'm trying to reach a female population or demographic, that it can be very difficult because of the pushback.
Right.
And excuse me, I think that as a female, it's, we tend more to take that personally, whereas it's really not personal. It's about them.
Yeah.
And it says more about them than it does about you.
Yep.
And so I think that is, whereas guys are just, guys don't usually respond like that in the first place. But also guys don't usually take it personally.
Yeah, no.
Like that.
Yeah.
It's just like, whatever. I know what I'm doing. I know that I stand behind this.
Yeah.
And I'm okay with that. And I don't care what they think.
Yeah.
Whereas I think women lean to the other side and it's like they give up because of the negativity that they receive.
I think that's fair in that assessment of like, how do we respond in those situations, right? Because there's certainly people with some of the topics that I talk about that are like, ooh, man, like some of the DM messages that I get sometimes, or like even just some of the comments, it's like people trying to start something, right?
Yes.
And it's very easy if you don't know how to respond to something well, instead of reacting, to get out of your logical thought process. That's actually where I go hyper logical. Like I'll really like boil it down and break it out and like almost stepwise it into a step-by-step process, because that's the only way you're resonating with that person. And if it's someone that's extremely passionate in their response, there's no way you're going to convince them, because they're not here for a logical conversation. They're here to make sure that you know that they disagree with it.
Yes. And also too, it's like, it gets to the point too where people, like, you can have comments where they're actually insulting. Like they start to insult you as a person, or how you look or how you sound, or, you know, and it's, I think that can be really difficult, especially if you are just starting out and you don't have a lot of confidence in the first place, and it's something new that you're talking about, and it is very controversial or taboo, or women don't usually talk about that.
Yep, I would agree.
So
I think a lot of it comes down to, like, when you think about coaching, and this is where in previous conversations I've brought up, there's a difference between an athlete trying to make money just coaching a couple people on the side, and actual progression within coaching models, and a coach who's trying to coach to bring coaching to a higher level in the industry. Is how do we develop coaches from a systems base that allows them to be logical in their responses to clients? How do we develop coaches emotionally that they're able to be logical in their responses to clients? Because while a lot of people get caught in content production and things about talking the X's and O's of coaching, really all that is one, spending the time on continuing education, and two, doing it. And once you start to do that to a certain level and to a certain point, the X's and O's part is not really the hard part of coaching. It's the human management. It's the person interaction. It's the, how do I keep this client moving in the direction that they need to go in? Or how do I develop this client to a level that they need to be in order to compete at the level they want to compete at? So that's the part of coaching that intrigues me. And that's the part of coaching that I feel if we spend more time on and having conversations around how to build systems, how to react to things, how to respond to things, rather than allowing our egos to get in the way and react to things, we can not only from an information standpoint move the industry forward, but just from like a general development of coaches, we can move the industry forward as well.
And I mean, if you look at the way that we coach, like in the systems that we have in place, I mean, we're really good at collecting data.
Yeah.
Right. But that the thing is if you only collect data, you just put people into like this little box. And you can't actually coach them as an individual. And you know that, yes, you'll have people that are high level athletes that might be, they don't really need a whole lot, and they have, you know, high level of self-actualization, and they communicate really well, and they might be very close to, say, 3 other clients that you have, and they just operate the same. But you know that that's not the majority, right? And it's, if you only collect data, then you can't meet that person where they are. And everyone does have a different starting point, and everyone's going to have their strength and their weakness with in a, like an athlete coach relationship.
Yeah.
And like, you know that there's going to be people that fill those sheets out like a mofo, right? And that's like and it's just like, you get it and you're just like, this is crazy. Like, these people are so detailed, but then they don't communicate anything else except for they check the boxes.
Yeah.
You know? And so I think that it's like, while data is really important, like you said, it's just, as a coach, we have to be able to meet our clients where they're at in any situation. Because I mean, you'll have people that, yes, they are just like robots, and then all of a sudden they're not. And then you start to see that emotional side, that subjective side come out in them. And so, but I think with the way that we do coach, with the systems we have in place, it allows us to have a really strong foundation so that we aren't guessing
when we start to talk to the client about whatever it is we're talking about.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Because it allows us to see things, of course, that they maybe aren't aware of.
Yeah, for sure. 100%.
Right? So,
well, I think that was a good overview of like coaches handling themselves within these client situations. Obviously, if you guys have not followed Jamie, make sure that you give her a follow on Instagram. It's Jamie No Switch.
Jamie No Switch.
Right. She's going to be starting her own YouTube page, as well as putting some content on the No Switch Fitness YouTube page, just like this stuff. So make sure you guys are following her with her development as a coach. She has a lot of good athletes competing this year, so I'm excited to see where those athletes land. And obviously, you guys know where to find me. No Switch Fitness on Instagram, No Switch Fitness on YouTube. We got all of our events for the year coming out fairly soon, so stay tuned for those dates and those locations. But until next time, take no off switch in the pursuit of results.